Chapter 1. The Invitation to the Frozen Gala. Hercule Poirot sat in his impeccably ordered London flat, the fire crackling softly in the grate, a cup of thick, sweet tisane balanced on the small table beside his armchair. It was a quiet January evening, the kind that invited reflection, yet Poirot's mind was never truly at rest. His moustaches, magnificent and perfectly waxed, twitched slightly as he examined the envelope that had arrived by special courier only that morning. The envelope was heavy, cream-coloured, and sealed with midnight blue wax, impressed by a crest he did not immediately recognise. An intricate snowflake encircling a pair of crossed dancing slippers. On the front, in elegant calligraphy, were the words Monsieur Hercule Poirot. With the compliments of the Comte et Comtesse de Glace Poirot, turned the envelope over in his delicate hands, his green eyes narrowing. He had heard of the Comte de Glace, a wealthy Swiss aristocrat whose family had made its fortune in watches and winter tourism, and his much younger English wife, Lady Eleanor, famed for her beauty and her passion for the ballroom. Every year they hosted the legendary icy ballroom waltz at their remote chateau high in the Swiss Alps, an event spoken of in hushed, envious tones among Europe's elite. He slit the envelope with a silver letter opener. Inside was a single card, thick as parchment, edged in silver. You are cordially invited to the Icy Ballroom Waltz, Chateau de Glace, Val d'Hiver, Switzerland, Friday, 17th of January. A night of elegance upon ice. Your presence would honour us beyond measure. Dress, black tie and diamonds. Transportation will be arranged. There was no personal note, no explanation as to why the greatest detective in Europe had been singled out for this glittering gathering of dancers, aristocrats and millionaires. Poirot placed the card on the table and leaned back, stroking his moustache thoughtfully. "It is curious," he murmured to himself. "One does not invite Hercule Poirot merely to watch pretty feet glide across a floor of ice. No, there is something else, a shadow behind the sparkle." Yet the little detective felt the familiar stir of interest, a challenge, perhaps, or danger. Either way, it was preferable to the dull routine of London in winter. 3 days later, Poirot found himself aboard a luxurious private train, winding its way through snow-laden valleys toward the Swiss border. The carriage provided for him was exquisite. Polished walnut panels, velvet seats, a small stove glowing warmly. Outside, the mountains rose like white giants, their peaks lost in cloud. Poirot sipped his chocolate and observed his fellow passengers with discreet attention. There were 8 guests in the saloon car besides himself. The Comte Philippe de Glace himself had come to greet the train at Geneva, tall, silver-haired, impeccably courteous, with the stiff bearing of old European nobility. His wife, Lady Eleanor, was a vision in sable and diamonds, her golden hair swept up beneath a fur hat. She laughed often, but Poirot noted that the laughter never quite reached her pale blue eyes. Among the others were Madame Irina Volkova, the celebrated Russian prima ballerina, once the toast of St. Petersburg and Paris, now in her 40s, but still possessing the long neck and arrogant grace of a swan. She travelled with her much younger protégé, Nikolai Volkov, no relation, she insisted coldly, a dark, intense dancer whose eyes followed her constantly. Mr. Reginald Hargreaves, a loud, florid Englishman who had made a fortune in South African diamonds, and lost most of it again at the tables. He drank whisky steadily and spoke of the good old days, when one could still shoot tigers in India. Miss Clarissa Vale, a beautiful young heiress with a sharp tongue, and a fortune inherited from her father's shipping line. She wore emerald earrings that flashed like green fire and seemed perpetually bored. Dr. Otto Reinhardt, a Swiss-German toxicologist of some renown, thin and precise, with round spectacles that magnified his pale eyes. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice was soft and chillingly exact. And finally, a late arrival who had boarded at Lausanne, a tall man in a black overcoat, his face half hidden by a silk scarf. He gave his name only as Monsieur Laurent and claimed to be an art dealer from Paris. Something about the way he moved, light, almost soundless, made Poirot's instincts prickle. The train climbed higher. Snow began to fall in thick, silent flakes. At dusk, they reached the tiny private station of Val de Hiver. Sleek horse-drawn sleighs awaited, their runners gleaming, bells jingling softly. The guests were wrapped in furs and conveyed up the winding mountain road to the Château de Glace. Poirot had seen many grand houses in his career, but nothing prepared him for this. The chateau was built of pale stone that seemed almost translucent in the moonlight, its towers and turrets rising like frozen flames. Every window blazed with light, and from within came the faint haunting strains of a waltz. They entered through colossal doors into an entrance hall floored with black and white marble. Above them hung an enormous chandelier, made entirely of icicles, real icicles, somehow preserved and lit from within, so that they glittered like 1,000 diamonds. But it was the ballroom that stole the breath. The vast room had been designed to resemble the heart of a glacier. The floor was a single sheet of thick, polished ice, perfectly smooth and glowing faintly blue from lights beneath. Walls of mirrored glass reflected the dancers 100-fold, creating the illusion of infinite space. From the ceiling hung more chandeliers of ice, dripping frozen stalactites that caught the light and scattered it in rainbow shards. Enormous arrangements of white roses and silver branches stood in crystal vases, and the air was perfumed with something cold and crisp, pine and frost and distant snow. Servants in powder-blue livery moved silently among the early arrivals, offering flutes of champagne so cold that frost formed on the glass. Lady Eleanor swept forward to greet Poirot personally. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice musical, "we are honoured, truly. I have read of your exploits, of the Orient Express, of the tragedies on the Nile. To have you here, among us." She trailed off, her smile brilliant but brittle. Poirot bowed over her gloved hand. "Madam, the honour is mine. Such beauty, such splendour. It is a setting for a fairy tale." "Or a tragedy," she replied lightly, then laughed as though she had made a joke. "Come, let me introduce you." As the evening progressed, more guests arrived. Minor royalty, a famous conductor, a couturier from Paris, an American film star seeking European Polish. The orchestra, hidden behind a screen of frost, played Strauss and Lehar. Couples began to glide across the ice in perfect synchrony, their reflections multiplying beneath them like ghosts. Poirot stood at the edge, sipping his champagne, watching. He saw Madame Volkova arguing in a low, fierce voice with Nikolai in a shadowed alcove. He saw Mr. Hargreaves press a small packet into Dr. Reinhardt's hand when he thought no one was looking. He saw Miss Clarissa Vale watching Monsieur Laurent with an expression that was half fear, half fascination. And he saw Lady Eleanor, standing alone by one of the great windows that looked out onto the blizzard now raging outside, her face suddenly pale and drawn, as though she had seen something terrible in the swirling snow. Poirot set down his glass. "Yes," he murmured to himself, "there is something here that is not right. The little grey cells, they are already at work." The orchestra struck up a new waltz, faster, more dramatic. Couples spun faster across the ice, jewels flashing, laughter rising. None of them yet knew that before the night was out, one of them would dance their last, and Hercule Poirot, with his keen eyes and incomparable mind, would be watching every step. Chapter 2. Whispers on the Ice Floor. The orchestra launched into Johann Strauss's Blue Danube, and the ballroom of the Château de Glace transformed into a living jewel. Couples glided onto the vast sheet of polished ice, their thin blades whispering against the surface, sending faint blue reflections dancing beneath them like trapped spirits. The mirrored walls multiplied every swirl of silk and flash of diamonds into infinity, while the great icicle chandeliers dripped frozen light across the scene. Hercule Poirot stood beside a tall column of carved silver, a fresh flute of champagne untouched in his gloved hand. He had no intention of dancing. Poirot preferred observation to participation. The waltz, he believed, revealed more about human nature when viewed from a stationary vantage point. "The dance," he murmured to himself, "is the most honest of arts. One cannot hide one's true character when one's feet must follow another's lead." His sharp green eyes moved methodically across the floor, cataloguing every nuance. Lady Eleanor de Glace, radiant in midnight blue velvet and diamonds, was partnered with Nikolai Volkov. The young Russian guided her with fierce intensity, his dark head bent close to hers. Too close. Poirot noted the subtle tension in Lady Eleanor's shoulders, the way her smile remained fixed while her fingers dug almost imperceptibly into Nikolai's sleeve, a silent plea or a warning. Close by, Madame Irina Volkova danced with the Comte Philippe. Her scarlet gown blazed like a wound against the pale ice, and she moved with the imperious authority of a woman who had once ruled the stages of Europe. Yet her gaze was not on her elderly partner. It followed Nikolai and Lady Eleanor with the cold, predatory focus of a swan defending its territory. Poirot's magnificent moustache twitched in quiet satisfaction. Ah yes, jealousy upon ice. How sharp the blades become. Mr. Reginald Hargreaves, florid and sweating despite the chill, had cornered Miss Clarissa Vale near the champagne tables. He gesticulated broadly, whisky slurring his words as he reminisced about tiger hunts and lost fortunes. Clarissa listened with half-lidded eyes, her emerald earrings catching the light like cold fire. Every few moments her gaze drifted toward the far end of the ballroom, where Monsieur Laurent stood motionless in shadow, his face half hidden by a black silk scarf he had not removed even indoors. Laurent had not danced once. He simply watched, gloved hands clasped behind his back, dark eyes unreadable. Dr. Otto Reinhardt circulated with precise, economical movements, nodding politely, exchanging brief words. Poirot observed the moment when Hargreaves passed close to the doctor. The Englishman's boisterous manner quieted instantly, and a small packet changed hands with the smoothness of long practice. The music swelled. Couples spun faster. The reflections beneath the ice created a dizzying double world. Dancers above, ghostly partners below. Poirot set his untouched champagne on a passing tray and began a slow circuit of the room's perimeter. He paused beside two footmen in powder blue livery. "Tell me," he asked softly in French, "the gentleman in the black scarf, Monsieur Laurent, has he attended this gala before?" The elder footman glanced nervously toward the shadowed figure. "Not under that name, monsieur. But the face, many years ago, in 1919, there was a similar man, an artist's model, they said. There was trouble. A lady took ill during the waltz. Poison was whispered. He vanished the next day. The family silenced it. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And now he returns. Most interesting. He continued his circuit and paused beside Madame Volkova, who had retreated to a velvet chaise during the interval between dances. She fanned herself languidly with black lace, her ample bosom rising and falling. "Madame permits?" Poirot bowed. Irina looked up, dark eyes assessing. "The famous Hercule Poirot. How intriguing! Sit if you must. I am tired of empty flattery." Poirot seated himself with graceful economy. "Yet you deserve flattery, madame. Your dancing remains magnificent. The fire of the old ballet russes still burns." She laughed, a low, bitter sound. "Flattery, after all. But yes, once I was magnificent. Now I watch my protégé steal what should still be mine." Her fan snapped shut like a gunshot. "And steal other things, too. You refer to Monsieur Volkov?" "I refer to ambition," she hissed, "and to women who believe jewels and a title can buy a man's soul." Her gaze cut toward Lady Eleanor, now laughing at something Nikolai whispered. "Have you attended every gala since the war?" Poirot asked innocently. "Everyone since 1918, Irina replied, even when it was held in secret. This floor has seen triumphs, monsieur, and tragedies. In 1923 a count fell and split his skull. Accident, they said. In 1931 a Swedish heiress drank poisoned champagne and died mid-spin. Again accident. She smiled without warmth. This ice is greedy. It demands its sacrifices, and it prefers them beautiful. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature settled over Poirot. Before he could respond, the orchestra struck up a new waltz. Faster, more dramatic. Couples flooded back onto the floor. Nikolai offered his hand to Irina with a courtly bow. She accepted with regal condescension. They took their places for the exhibition that traditionally highlighted the evening. Poirot returned to his column, watching as the pair began their performance. They were breathtaking. Irina's scarlet gown flaring like flame, Nikolai's black suit a perfect counterpoint. They moved as one being, lift after flawless lift, spin after dizzying spin. The applause began, then faltered. Irina's body suddenly stiffened. Her eyes widened in shock, a strangled sound escaping her throat. Nikolai tightened his grip instinctively, but her weight sagged. As he lowered her in the final dramatic dip, her knees buckled completely. She collapsed onto the ice in a brilliant heap of scarlet silk, one gloved hand clutching at her throat. For one frozen heartbeat, the entire ballroom held its breath. Then came the screams. Chapter 3. The Fatal Turn in the Waltz. The orchestra had reached the crescendo of Waldteufel's Skater's Waltz, a piece chosen deliberately for its swirling, breathless energy. The ice floor gleamed like a mirror under the chandeliers. And every couple on it moved as one organism, 30 blades cutting perfect arcs, 30 reflections gliding beneath them in ghostly synchrony. The air was thick with perfume, champagne, and the faint metallic scent of extreme cold. Hercule Poirot remained at the edge of the floor, hands clasped behind his back, eyes never still. He had positioned himself near the great double doors that led to the terrace, partly for the cooler air, partly because it gave him the best view of every face. Something in the atmosphere had shifted in the last hour. The laughter had grown a fraction too loud, the glances a fraction too sharp. The little grey cells were alert. In the centre of the floor, the evening star couple commanded all attention. Madame Irina Volkova and Nikolai Volkov were performing the exhibition waltz that traditionally closed the first half of the gala. They were magnificent. Irina, in her scarlet gown, led with imperious grace. Nikolai, black-clad and lithe, followed her every signal with the devotion of a shadow. They spun faster and faster, closer and closer, until it seemed they must collide. Yet they never did. The audience watched in breathless silence, broken only by the hiss of blades and the soaring violins. Lady Eleanor stood near Poirot, clapping softly in time. "They are perfection, are they not?" she murmured. "Perfection," Poirot agreed, "or the illusion of it." At that moment, Nikolai executed a daring lift. Irina rose above his head, arms outstretched like a crimson bird, then descended into a deep backbend as he spun her. The applause began, then froze. Irina's body stiffened mid-motion. Her eyes widened, not in theatrical surprise, but in genuine shock. A strange gurgling sound escaped her throat. Nikolai, sensing the change, tightened his grip, but her weight suddenly sagged. As he lowered her to the ice, her knees buckled completely. She collapsed in a heap of scarlet silk, one arm flung out, the other clutching at her throat. For a heartbeat, the ballroom was utterly silent. Then chaos erupted. "Irina!" Nikolai shouted, dropping to his knees beside her. His hands hovered over her body, afraid to touch. Guests surged forward, then halted as if hitting an invisible wall. The orchestra faltered and died note by note. Poirot moved with surprising speed for so small a man. He pushed through the ring of onlookers and knelt opposite Nikolai. "Stand back, monsieur. Give her air." Irina's face was turning a dreadful bluish colour. Her lips moved soundlessly. Foam, delicate and white, appeared at the corners of her mouth. Her eyes, those proud dark eyes, fixed on Poirot with desperate intensity, then rolled upward. "Doctor!" Poirot snapped, looking up. "Dr. Reinhardt! Quickly!" The Swiss toxicologist appeared as if conjured, spectacles flashing in the chandelier light. He dropped beside the dying woman, fingers already at her neck seeking a pulse. "Too late," he said almost at once, voice calm and clinical. "Cyanide, I would say, very rapid." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Lady Eleanor pressed a gloved hand to her mouth. "Cyanide! But how—" The Comte Philippe arrived, face ashen. "Clear the floor! Everyone back! This is unthinkable!" Servants began herding guests away, but Poirot raised a hand. "No, no, no! Nobody leaves this room. The doors, close them. The storm outside is fierce. No one departs the chateau tonight. We are all, how do you say, snowbound together." His authority was absolute. Even the Comte hesitated, then nodded to the footman. The great doors thudded shut. Poirot turned back to the body. Irina Volkova lay on her back now. Scarlet gown spread like spilled blood across the ice. Her eyes stared sightlessly at the icicle chandelier above. "Observe," Poirot said quietly to Dr. Reinhardt. "The lips blue, the odour on the breath, faint, bitter almonds. Yes, cyanide. Potassium cyanide, perhaps, or sodium, very fast." Nikolai was still on his knees, face buried in his hands. She was fine. She was laughing only minutes ago. Poirot's gaze swept the immediate area. A champagne flute lay overturned near Irina's outstretched hand, its contents forming a small frozen puddle on the ice. He bent closer without touching it. "This glass, was it hers?" Nikolai looked up, eyes red. "Yes, she took a sip just before we began the exhibition, from the tray near the orchestra dais." Poirot carefully lifted the flute by the stem, holding it to the light. A faint white residue clung to the inside rim. "Residue," he murmured. "Someone introduced the poison into the glass itself. Clever." The cold would mask any unusual taste. He placed the flute on a nearby silver tray, carried by a trembling maid. This must not be touched further. It is evidence. Lady Eleanor approached, voice shaking. Monsieur Poirot, you will investigate this? The police cannot reach us for days in this blizzard. Poirot bowed slightly. Madam, it seems fate, and perhaps the murderer, has decided that Hercule Poirot shall be the instrument of justice. He straightened and addressed the room, his voice carrying effortlessly despite its softness. Mesdames et messieurs, a terrible crime has been committed under this roof. Madame Volkova has been poisoned in full view of us all. Until the authorities arrive, I, Hercule Poirot, will conduct the inquiry. I must ask for your complete cooperation. No one is to leave the ballroom until I have spoken to each of you. A murmur of protest rose, quickly stilled by the Comte's raised hand. Monsieur Poirot is correct. We are all suspects until proven otherwise. Let us retire to the salons. The ballroom must remain undisturbed. As guests began to file out, Poirot noticed several details that lodged firmly in his mind. Mr. Reginald Hargreaves was sweating heavily despite the cold, mopping his florid face with a handkerchief. Miss Clarissa Vale stood very still, staring at the body with an expression that might have been horror or calculation. Monsieur Laurent, the mysterious late arrival, had not moved from his shadowed corner. His eyes, dark and unreadable, met Poirot's for a long moment before he turned away, and Dr. Reinhardt, after pronouncing death, had quietly pocketed something small from the ice near Irina's hand. A single white glove, monogrammed with the letter V. Poirot made a mental note. As the last guests left, servants drew velvet curtains across the mirrors, as though veiling the room's shocked reflections. The orchestra packed away their instruments in silence. Only Poirot and Nikolai remained with the body. Nikolai looked up, voice raw. She was everything to me. Teacher, mother, lover, everything. Who would do this? That, monsieur, Poirot said gently, is what I intend to discover. But tell me, did Madame Volkova have enemies? Nikolai gave a bitter laugh. Only everyone who ever envied her, and everyone she ever humiliated, which was most of the dancing world. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Then we begin with a very long list. Outside, the blizzard howled against the windows, sealing the chateau in a tomb of snow and ice. Inside, the temperature seemed to drop another degree. Death had taken its first turn in the waltz, and Hercule Poirot knew, with the certainty of long experience, that it would not be the last. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Snowbound Halls. The blizzard raged with unrelenting fury, hurling snow against the tall windows of the Château de Glace until the glass groaned under the assault. Inside, the great house felt like a ship trapped in ice, every corridor draughty, every fire struggling against the invading cold. The guests had been herded into the smaller salons adjoining the ballroom, but no one could settle. Conversation was brittle, eyes darted suspiciously, and the champagne had long since been abandoned. Hercule Poirot moved among them like a quiet, precise shadow. He had insisted that the ballroom remain locked and guarded, the body of Madame Volkova left undisturbed until morning light might reveal more. Now, with the storm sealing them in for at least 2 days, he had begun his methodical exploration of the chateau's hidden veins. Crime, he murmured to himself as he slipped through a side door into the east wing, is never committed in isolation. It leaves footprints, not only on ice, but in drawers, in letters, in the corners of rooms where lovers quarrel and enemies plot. A footman had provided him with a master key at the Comte's reluctant order. Poirot used it now to enter the guest suites one by one, moving with the silent efficiency of a man who had searched many houses in his long career. First, the rooms occupied by Madame Volkova and Nikolai Volkov. They had been allocated adjoining suites on the second floor, connected by a discreet interior door. Poirot's lips pursed in approval. How convenient for passion, how dangerous for jealousy. Irina's room was a chaos of scarlet and black, gowns flung across chairs, cosmetics scattered on the dressing table, a half-empty bottle of vodka beside the bed. On the nightstand lay a small leather-bound diary. Poirot opened it with gloved fingers. The entries were in Russian, but Poirot's knowledge of the language was sufficient. The final pages were bitter. Nikolai grows colder each day. He looks at Eleanor de Glace the way he once looked at me. I made him. Without me, he is nothing. If he betrays me, he will regret it. The last entry, dated only yesterday, was underlined heavily. Tonight, I will remind them all who is the true Queen of the Ice. Poirot closed the diary thoughtfully. Threat or mere artistic temperament? He slipped it into his pocket for later study. Nikolai's adjoining room was stark by contrast. A dancer's discipline evident in the neatly folded clothes, the ballet shoes aligned precisely. But in the wastepaper basket, Poirot found a crumpled letter, English handwriting, scented faintly with jasmine. My darling, meet me in the Winter Garden at midnight after the exhibition. We can speak freely there. E. Lady Eleanor. Poirot smoothed the letter and placed it beside the diary in his pocket. He moved on. Mr. Reginald Hargreaves's suite smelled strongly of whisky and cigar smoke. The Englishman had clearly been packing in a hurry before the murder. A half-filled suitcase lay open on the bed. Inside, tucked beneath shirts, Poirot discovered a bundle of promissory notes, IOUs from various Monte Carlo casinos, each stamped overdue in red. The total was staggering. Beside them lay a small photograph of a younger Hargreaves arm-in-arm with Irina Volkova on a St. Petersburg stage, both radiant in costume. Poirot's eyebrows rose. So the loud Englishman had once been more than an admirer. In Dr. Otto Reinhardt's room, everything was meticulous. Medical journals stacked precisely, a portable laboratory case containing vials and test tubes. On the writing desk lay a notebook filled with chemical formulae. One page had been torn out recently. The ragged edge was fresh. Poirot held the notebook to the firelight and discerned faint indentations from the missing page. With a soft pencil, he shaded the top sheet gently. Words emerged. KCN 5G dissolved in 50 ml ethanol. Odor masked by almond essence. Test required. Potassium cyanide. Dr. Reinhardt had been experimenting. Poirot's expression grew grave. He photographed the indentations with his small pocket camera, then replaced the notebook exactly as found. Miss Clarissa Vale's suite was a riot of emerald silk and modern perfume. The young heiress had brought far more luggage than necessary. Trunks of gowns she could not possibly wear in one weekend. In a locked jewel case, the lock yielded easily to Poirot's picks. He found not only emeralds, but a bundle of letters tied with black ribbon. They were from Monsieur Laurent, though signed only with an ornate L. The most recent read, You cannot hide forever, Clarissa. The past has sharp blades like those on the dance floor. We must speak tonight, or I will be forced to speak to others. Blackmail? Poirot pondered. He returned the letters and relocked the case. Finally, he sought the suite allocated to Monsieur Laurent himself. It was at the far end of the west wing, smaller than the others, almost as though the Comte had wished to keep the late arrival at a distance. The room was bare. A single suitcase, half unpacked. No personal photographs, no letters. Only a small leather wallet containing a passport in the name of Laurent Duval, French, born 1898. But when Poirot examined the photograph page closely under his magnifying glass, he saw the faint traces of alteration, the edges of the pasted photograph slightly raised. A false passport. Beneath the mattress he found a thin dossier wrapped in oilskin. Inside were newspaper clippings, yellowed with age. Russian ballerina, implicated in 1919 poisoning scandal. Swiss police baffled countess's lover. Vanishes after gala tragedy. And one photograph, a younger Irina Volkova, laughing in the arms of a dark-haired man whose face had been viciously scratched out with a pen. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Revenge, then. Old, cold, and patient. As he emerged from Laurent's room, a floorboard creaked behind him. He turned swiftly. Lady Eleanor stood in the corridor, wrapped in a white fur cloak, her face pale in the dim gaslight. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, voice low, "I saw your light under the door. Have you discovered anything?" Poirot regarded her steadily. "Many things, madame. Secrets have a way of revealing themselves when death enters the house." She glanced nervously toward the ballroom. "Irina, she was not an easy woman. She made enemies, but murder. Tell me, madame," Poirot said gently, "did you arrange to meet Nikolai Volkov in the Winter Garden tonight?" Her eyes widened. "How could you possibly—" "A letter, madame, found in his room. Lovers are rarely discreet." Colour flooded her cheeks, then drained away. "It was nothing, a foolishness. My husband, he is much older. Nikolai made me feel alive again." "And Madame Volkova discovered this?" "Irina knew everything," Lady Eleanor whispered. "She threatened to tell Philippe unless I paid her a great deal of money." "Blackmail," Poirot said softly. "Another motive to add to our collection." A sudden gust rattled the windows, and somewhere in the house a door slammed. Lady Eleanor jumped. "There is something else," she said, voice trembling. "Tonight, before the exhibition, I saw someone near the champagne trays. A figure in black. They were doing something to one of the glasses." "Could you identify this person?" "It was too dark, but tall, graceful, like a dancer." Or like a man who had once been a dancer's lover, Poirot thought. He escorted Lady Eleanor back to the main salon, where the remaining guests sat in uneasy clusters. Nikolai was drinking steadily, eyes red. Hargreaves snored in an armchair. Dr. Reinhardt cleaned his spectacles obsessively. Clarissa Vale stared into the fire, and Monsieur Laurent, where was Monsieur Laurent? Poirot's gaze swept the room. The mysterious stranger had vanished. At that moment, a scream echoed from the entrance hall. High, terrified. Poirot ran, the others close behind. A maid stood at the foot of the grand staircase, pointing upward with a shaking hand. On the landing above, freshly painted in what appeared to be blood across the pale wall, were the words, "One down, more to follow." The letters dripped slowly, crimson against white. The temperature in the hall seemed to plummet another 10 degrees. Poirot stared at the warning, his face grim. "The murderer," he said quietly, "is not content with a single victim. We are all prisoners now, in a house of ice, with a killer who dances among us." Outside, the storm howled louder, as if laughing at their terror. Chapter 5. The Melting Alibis. Morning arrived grey and reluctant, the blizzard reduced to a steady, muffling fall of snow that blurred the world beyond the windows. The great ballroom remained sealed, guarded by 2 stone-faced footmen. while Irina Volkova's body lay beneath a white sheet on the ice floor, waiting for the authorities who would not come for days. Hercule Poirot had not slept. He had spent the night in the library, surrounded by leather-bound volumes he did not read, arranging and rearranging the facts in his mind like pieces on a chessboard. At 8 o'clock precisely, he summoned every guest to the smaller winter salon, a room of pale green silk walls and tall windows overlooking the frozen terraces. Fires blazed in 2 marble hearths, yet the chill lingered. Poirot stood before the assembled company, small, immaculate, hands clasped behind his back. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice calm but carrying absolute authority. "We are prisoners of the storm, yes, but also prisoners of the truth. One among us has committed murder. It is my task to discover who, and I will do so by examining the one thing a criminal cannot easily fabricate, the alibi." He paused, letting his gaze travel slowly across each face. "Let us begin with the moment of death. Madame Volkova collapsed at approximately 11:47, during the final minute of the exhibition waltz. The poison cyanide acts swiftly. She drank from her champagne glass no more than 2 minutes earlier, at 11:45. Therefore, the poison was introduced into that glass between the time the tray was placed on the side table at 11:35 and the moment she lifted it to her lips. He turned to Nikolai Volkov, who sat hunched forward, eyes bloodshot. "Monsieur Volkov, you were with Madame Volkova for the entire exhibition. Did you see her take the glass herself?" Nikolai nodded dully. "Yes, the tray was brought by a maid just as we finished our bows, after the previous dance. Irina was thirsty. She always was after performing. She took the nearest flute. And you, monsieur, did you drink?" "No, I do not drink champagne before a performance." Poirot nodded. "So the poison was intended specifically for her, not random." He moved to Lady Eleanor, who sat very straight, hands folded tightly in her lap. "Madame, you were standing near the orchestra dais at 11:35, were you not? You spoke to several guests." Lady Eleanor's voice was steady, though colour rose in her cheeks. "I greeted friends. I may have passed the table. Yes. Did you see anyone tamper with the glasses?" She hesitated. "I cannot be certain. There were many people moving about." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Yet last night you told me you saw a tall figure in black near the tray." A ripple of tension passed through the room. Lady Eleanor glanced at her husband, then back to Poirot. "I was upset. The light is poor. I may have been mistaken." The Comte Philippe stirred. "Eleanor, if you saw something, I saw nothing definite," she said quickly. Poirot made a small note in his leather-bound book. "We will return to that." He turned to Mr. Reginald Hargreaves, whose florid face was pale and moist. "Monsieur Hargreaves, you were observed near the champagne table at 11:38. A footman saw you." Hargreaves blustered. "Good Lord, man, I was fetching drinks for myself and Miss Vale. Nothing sinister in that. Yet you did not bring Miss Vale a glass." She changed her mind. Miss Clarissa Vale, seated beside him, said coolly, "Actually, I never asked for one." Hargreaves shot her a furious glance. Poirot continued smoothly. "And Dr. Reinhardt, you passed the table at 11:40, carrying your medical bag. You spoke briefly to Monsieur Hargreaves." The toxicologist inclined his head. "I congratulated him on his recovery from a recent illness. That is all." Poirot's voice sharpened slightly. "A recovery aided, perhaps, by certain chemicals you carry? Your notebook shows experiments with cyanide solutions." Dr. Reinhardt did not flinch. "I'm a scientist, Monsieur Poirot. I study poisons professionally. That does not make me a murderer. Yet you pronounced death with remarkable speed, and pocketed Madame Volkova's glove from the ice." Reinhardt's pale eyes flickered. "I intended to examine it for traces of poison, a natural scientific reflex." "Or to remove evidence," Poirot suggested softly. The room was deathly silent. Poirot turned finally to the empty chair at the end of the row. "And Monsieur Laurent, or whatever your true name may be, you are conspicuously absent this morning. A maid reports that your room is empty, your bed unslept in." The Comte frowned. He was seen leaving the salon after the message appeared on the wall. No one has seen him since. Poirot's expression grew grave. "Then we must find him, but first, a discovery made at dawn." He produced a small silver object from his pocket, a man's cufflink, engraved with an ornate L. This was found beneath the champagne table, caught in a crack in the ice. It was not there when I examined the scene immediately after the murder. Someone returned later, and lost this. Clarissa Vale gasped. "That is Laurent's. I have seen him wear them." All eyes turned to her. Poirot regarded her steadily. "Mademoiselle, you received letters from this man. Letters that threatened exposure of a past scandal, unless you paid him. Is that not so?" Clarissa's composure cracked. He said he had proof that my father's shipping fortune was built on smuggling during the war. He demanded £50,000 to remain silent." Hargreaves stared at her. "Good God, girl, why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were being blackmailed too," she flared. "By Irina. She knew about your gambling debts and threatened to tell your creditors unless you paid her." The room erupted in exclamations. Poirot raised a hand for silence. "Yes, yes, blackmail is the thread that binds many of you. Madame Volkova extorted money from several guests. Monsieur Hargreaves, Lady Eleanor, Miss Vale, all paid or were about to pay. Dr. Reinhardt, did she approach you also?" Reinhardt hesitated. "She claimed to know I had supplied certain substances to a patient who later died. She wanted money to keep silent." "And Monsieur Laurent?" Nikolai spoke for the first time, voice rough. "Irina destroyed him years ago. In 1919, she accused him falsely of theft to protect her own lover. He was ruined, banished from Europe. He swore revenge." Poirot nodded slowly. "So many motives, but only one murderer." At that moment, the door burst open. A footman, white-faced, stood panting. "Monsieur Poirot! In the Winter Garden! We've found him!" The company rose as one and followed Poirot through frozen corridors to the glass-walled conservatory at the rear of the chateau. Snow had drifted against the panes, turning the light greenish and dim. Monsieur Laurent lay sprawled among the potted palms, a dagger protruding from his chest. His eyes stared sightlessly at the glass roof. Blood had frozen in dark ribbons across the marble floor. Near his outstretched hand lay a torn scrap of paper. Poirot knelt carefully and read it aloud. "You should have stayed away. The past is buried." In the same crimson paint used for the wall message. Lady Eleanor gave a small, choked cry. Nikolai swore under his breath. Dr. Reinhardt adjusted his spectacles, expression unreadable. Poirot stood, surveying the scene with clinical detachment. "2 murders now," he said quietly. "And the killer grows bolder. But boldness leads to mistakes." He turned to the group. "Observe, the dagger is from the display in the armory. Anyone could have taken it. The message is written in the same hand, but look here." He pointed to faint marks in the frost on the floor. Footprints leading in, but not out. The murderer entered through the side door from the terrace, killed Monsieur Laurent, and left the same way. Yet the snow on the terrace is undisturbed. He opened the terrace door. Fresh snow lay smooth and trackless. "Impossible," breathed the Comte. "No," Poirot corrected. "Merely clever. The murderer did not leave by the door. He, or she, left by another route, and that route will tell us much." He closed the door and faced them. Eyes bright. The alibis melt like spring ice. Someone among you has lied about where they were after midnight. Someone returned to the ballroom, dropped the cufflink deliberately or accidentally. Someone killed again to silence a dangerous witness. His gaze swept the terrified faces. The net tightens, mes amis, and Hercule Poirot does not rest until the guilty are caught. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing the world, but not the footprints of murder. Chapter 6. Echoes of a Broken Melody. The second night fell heavier than the first. The storm had eased into a steady silent snowfall that draped the chateau in deeper white, but the atmosphere inside had grown almost suffocating. 2 bodies now lay in the cold storeroom beneath the ballroom. Irina Volkova beneath her sheet of ice, and Monsieur Laurent, or whatever his true name had been, wrapped in linen, the dagger removed but the wound still dark against his chest. Hercule Poirot had demanded that the surviving guests remain together in the music room, an elegant chamber lined with gilded instruments and portraits of long-dead dancers. No one was to wander alone. Fires burned low, casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Poirot stood before the grand piano, upon which lay the gala programme, the poisoned champagne flute sealed in glass, the bloodied note, the cufflink, and the torn scrap of paper found beside Laurent's body. He regarded them like a conductor surveying his orchestra before the downbeat. "We have motives in abundance," he began quietly, "but motives are not proof. To find the truth, we must listen to the echoes, the stories that each of you carry from the past. Tonight, you will tell me those stories, all of them." He turned first to Nikolai Volkov, who sat apart from the others staring at the floor. "Monsieur Volkov, you loved Madame Volkova once. Perhaps you love her still. Yet you plan to leave her for Lady Eleanor. Irina discovered this. Did she threaten to destroy your career as she once destroyed others?" Nikolai's head snapped up, eyes blazing. "She made me. I was a starving boy in Petrograd when she took me in, trained me, gave me everything. But she owned me, Poirot. Every step I danced belonged to her. Yes, I wanted freedom. Yes, Eleanor offered it, but I did not kill Irina. I could not." "Yet you were closest to her when she died," Poirot said softly. "You lifted her, spun her, lowered her to the ice. A dancer's strength is great. A small vial passed from hand to hand during a lift. Would anyone notice?" Nikolai's face crumpled. "I swear on my life." Poirot raised a hand. "We will see." He moved to Dr. Otto Reinhardt, who sat polishing his spectacles with mechanical precision. "Doctor, your notebook reveals experiments with cyanide. You knew exactly how much would kill swiftly and silently. And Irina Volkova was blackmailing you over a patient's death, a convenient way to silence her forever." Reinhardt replaced his spectacles calmly. "I am a man of science, Monsieur Poirot, not a murderer. Yes, I studied cyanide, many poisons. Yes, she demanded money. But I had already decided to pay. Killing her would have been inefficient." "Yet you removed her glove from the scene," Poirot pressed. "To test for residue," Reinhardt replied. "I have done so, There was none on the glove. The poison was in the glass alone. Poirot nodded slowly, making a mental note. Mr. Reginald Hargreaves cleared his throat noisily. "Look here, this is all very dramatic, but I had no reason to kill the Russian woman. Paid her a bit to keep quiet about my debts, that's all. Bad form otherwise." Poirot's eyes fixed on him. "You loved her once, did you not? The photograph in your room, St. Petersburg, 1912. You were young, rich, infatuated. She discarded you for a richer patron. Old wounds fester, monsieur." Hargreaves flushed crimson. "Ancient history. I'm a businessman, not some melodramatic Slav." Miss Clarissa Vale laughed. A short, brittle sound. "We are all melodramatic tonight, Mr. Hargreaves. Irina was bleeding me dry over my father's wartime dealings, and Laurent, he knew the whole truth. He was going to expose me unless I paid more. Now he is dead too. Someone is tying up loose ends very neatly." Poirot turned to her. "And you, mademoiselle, where were you between midnight and 2 o'clock this morning?" "In my room," she said defiantly. "Alone, reading. Yet your shoes, when I examined them earlier, had traces of green leaf mould on the soles, the kind found only in the winter garden." Clarissa paled. I walked there earlier in the evening to clear my head." "Before or after Monsieur Laurent was stabbed?" She said nothing. Lady Eleanor spoke for the first time, voice barely above a whisper. "Enough. We are tearing each other apart like animals. Irina was cruel. She hoarded secrets the way misers hoard gold. But 2 murders." Poirot picked up the gala program from the piano. It was heavy cream card, embossed with silver snowflakes. "This program," he said, "contains more than the order of dances. Observe the margins." He held it to the lamplight. Faint pencil marks were visible, dots and dashes beside certain musical titles. "Morse code," Poirot announced. "A message hidden in plain sight. It reads, 'The past returns on blades of ice. Vengeance for 1919. The room went very still. Monsieur Laurent's clippings, Poirot continued, told of a scandal here in 1919. A young dancer, Antoine Duval, was accused by Irina Volkova of stealing jewels from a countess. He was ruined, imprisoned briefly, then vanished. His brother swore revenge. Laurent was that brother. Nikolai stirred. "Antoine Duval. I have heard Irina speak of him. She laughed about it. Said he was a fool who deserved his fate." Poirot placed the program down. "So Laurent came here to confront her, perhaps to kill her. But someone killed him first to prevent him revealing the murderer of Irina." He moved to the piano and struck a single low note. It reverberated through the room like a warning. "Now we must recreate the music of that fatal evening. The orchestra has departed, but the gramophone will serve." He wound the machine and placed a record upon it, the Skater's Waltz. As the music began, tinny but recognizable, Poirot closed his eyes. "Listen," he said. "In the choreography of the exhibition, there is a moment, a lift, a spin, a deep backbend. At the height of the lift, the woman's hand is free for perhaps 2 seconds, long enough to drop something into her own glass as her partner lowers her past the side table." Nikolai stared. "You are saying suicide?" "No," Poirot said firmly. "Irina Volkova did not wish to die, but someone else could have used that moment, someone who knew the choreography intimately." All eyes turned to Nikolai. "I was holding her," he protested. "My hands were on her waist." "Yet earlier, during the interval, you fetched her wrap from the table. The glass was already there. A quick motion. No!" The music swelled. Poirot stopped the gramophone abruptly. "There is another possibility," he said. "The poison was not in the glass when Irina took it. It was added later, after she collapsed. Dr. Reinhardt frowned. Impossible. Cyanide acts within minutes. Unless, Poirot said softly, the true poison was administered earlier, and the residue in the glass planted to mislead. He produced a small vial from his pocket, clear liquid, labelled in Reinhardt's precise hand. This was found hidden in the lining of Monsieur Laurent's suitcase, not cyanide, a rare plant extract, slow-acting, odourless, symptoms delayed by up to an hour. Laurent intended to poison Irina slowly, perhaps over several glasses, so suspicion would not fall on the single drink. The room erupted in exclamations. Then Irina was poisoned twice? Lady Eleanor whispered. Precisely, Poirot said. Once by the slow poison of revenge, administered by Laurent over the evening, and once by the swift cyanide, by someone who discovered his plan and decided to accelerate death, while casting blame elsewhere. He looked around the circle of pale faces. The second killer is among us still, and they believed Laurent knew their identity, which is why he had to die so quickly, so messily. Clarissa Vale rose suddenly. I cannot bear this any longer. I am going to my room. Non, mademoiselle, Poirot said sharply. No one leaves. But she was already at the door. As she grasped the handle, a sharp crack echoed through the room. The great chandelier above them, another masterpiece of preserved icicles, shivered, groaned, and came crashing down in a thunder of crystal and ice. Clarissa screamed and flung herself aside as the mass shattered across the piano, shards flying like daggers. Poirot stood unmoved amid the wreckage, brushing fragments from his coat. Mon Dieu, he murmured, the murderer grows desperate indeed. A loosened chain, perhaps, tampered with earlier. Another attempt to silence a witness. He looked at Clarissa, who lay trembling on the floor, or to punish one who knows too much. The fires flickered low. Outside, the snow fell silently. In the broken melody of shattered crystal, Poirot heard the final notes of the puzzle falling into place. One more act remained. Chapter 7. The Chilling Confrontation. The third morning broke clear and cruelly bright. The storm had spent itself during the night, leaving the Alps draped in pristine white and the sky a hard, icy blue. For the first time in days, the world beyond the Château de Glace was visible. Silent peaks, frozen valleys, and far below, the faint promise of roads that might soon be passable. Hercule Poirot, however, had no intention of waiting for the police. At 10 o'clock, he ordered the great ballroom unlocked and the velvet curtains drawn back. Sunlight poured across the ice floor, turning it into a blinding mirror. The sheet still covered Irina Volkova's body at the centre. Laurent's had been left in the storeroom. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle facing the orchestra dais, where Poirot now stood, small and impeccable in his black overcoat, hands clasped behind his back. One by one the survivors entered. The Comte and Lady Eleanor, Nikolai Volkov, Dr. Reinhardt, Mr. Hargreaves, and Miss Clarissa Vale. Their faces were drawn with exhaustion and fear. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint creak of the ice beneath their feet, and the distant drip of melting icicles from the chandeliers. Poirot waited until they were seated, then began. Mesdames et messieurs, the storm has ended, but the drama must have its final act. 2 people have died in this house, one by clever poison, one by brutal dagger. Many of you had reason to wish Madame Volkova silent. Several of you had reason to fear Monsieur Laurent. Yet only one person killed them both. He paused, letting the silence stretch. First, let us dispense with the false trails. Monsieur Laurent, whose real name was Marcel Duval, came here seeking revenge for his brother's ruin in 1919. He brought a slow plant poison, intending to make Irina suffer over hours, perhaps days. He administered small doses in every glass she drank during the evening. That is why she complained of faintness before the exhibition, why her collapse seemed slightly delayed for cyanide. Nikolai stirred. Then the cyanide was added later, Poirot said, by the true murderer, who discovered Laurent's plan and decided to accelerate death while creating confusion. The cyanide residue in the glass, the dropped cufflink, both planted to cast suspicion on Laurent himself. Dr. Reinhardt leaned forward. But Laurent was then stabbed to prevent him revealing what he knew. Precisely, Poirot agreed. The second murder was panic, not design. The killer feared Laurent had seen or guessed too much. He turned to the group. To catch the murderer, we must recreate the fatal dance, not with bodies, but with steps. Monsieur Volkov, if you please, take your position as you did for the exhibition. Nikolai rose reluctantly and moved to the center of the floor. Lady Eleanor, you observed from beside the dais. Stand there. She obeyed, pale but composed. Dr. Reinhardt, you passed the champagne table moments before the tray was brought out. Take your place. One by one, Poirot positioned them. Hargreaves near the side door, Clarissa at the edge of the floor, the Comte near the terrace entrance. Now, Poirot said, we begin. He signalled to a footman who had been instructed to play the gramophone hidden behind the screen. The opening bars of the Skater's Waltz filled the ballroom. Nikolai began to move through the choreography alone, marking the steps, arms extended as if holding an invisible partner. The others watched, tense. At this point, Poirot narrated, Irina lifts her glass in salute to the audience. She drinks. The tray is removed almost immediately by the maid. He watched their faces carefully. Now, the lift. Nikolai rose on his toes, arms high, then spun. In this moment, Poirot continued, the murderer had already acted. The cyanide was not added during the dance. It was added earlier, when the tray was prepared in the anteroom. All eyes turned to him. Yes, Poirot said softly. The anteroom, where only one person had both opportunity and motive strong enough to risk everything. He looked directly at Lady Eleanor. Madam, you prepared the tray yourself. You told the maid you wished to surprise Irina with a special vintage. No one questioned the hostess. You dissolved the cyanide, supplied perhaps by Dr. Reinhardt, in payment of your own blackmail debt, and coated the inside of one glass. You knew Irina would take the nearest flute. You had watched her do so for years. Lady Eleanor went very white. This is absurd. Why would I? Because, Poirot interrupted gently, Irina was destroying your life. She had proof of your affair with Nikolai, letters, photographs. She demanded not only money, but that you force your husband to alter his will, disinheriting Nikolai's future child, your child. A collective gasp rose. The Comte stared at his wife as though seeing her for the first time. Poirot continued relentlessly. You discovered Laurent's slow poison by chance. Perhaps you saw him tamper with an earlier glass. You realized that if Irina died slowly, suspicion would fall on many, including yourself. Better a swift public death that could be blamed on an outsider. So you added the cyanide. Lady Eleanor's voice shook. You have no proof. Ah, but I have. Poirot produced a small crystal vial from his pocket. This was found hidden in the lining of your fur cloak, madame. Empty, but with traces of cyanide. And your gloves, the ones you wore that evening, have faint almond staining inside the fingertips. She stared at the vial as if hypnotized. "And the second murder?" Dr. Reinhardt asked quietly. "Laurent confronted you in the winter garden after midnight," Poirot said. "He had guessed. He threatened to expose everything unless you paid him far more. In terror, you seized the dagger you had noticed earlier in the armory display, taken for protection during the night. You stabbed him, wrote the note in pig's blood from the kitchen, and escaped through the hidden servants' passage that runs behind the conservatory. No footprints in the snow." Lady Eleanor laughed. A high, broken sound. "All supposition. You cannot prove—" "I can," Poirot said, "because you made one fatal mistake. When the chandelier was tampered with last night, you believed Clarissa Vale was about to confess seeing you near the anteroom. You loosened the chain earlier, hoping to silence her. But Clarissa saw nothing. She was in the winter garden earlier, meeting Nikolai, not you." Nikolai bowed his head. Lady Eleanor looked around wildly. The footmen had quietly moved to block the doors. "It was her fault," she cried suddenly. "Irina, she took everything, my youth, my happiness, now my future." She laughed when I begged her to stop. She said I was weak, that Nikolai would tire of me as he had of her. I had to end it. The Comte rose slowly, face ashen. "Eleanor," she turned to him, eyes blazing. "You never saw me, Philippe. Only your precious chateau, your precious gala. Irina was going to destroy us all." Poirot stepped forward. "Madame, it is over." For a moment she stood frozen, jewels flashing in the sunlight like shards of ice. Then her shoulders sagged. She sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. The gramophone had reached the final soaring notes of the waltz. As the music died away, the ballroom seemed suddenly unbearably cold. Poirot regarded the weeping woman with something close to pity. "The dance is ended, madam, and the ice, it claims its final victim." Outside, far down the mountain road, the faint sound of bells announced the arrival of the police sleighs. Justice, delayed by snow, had finally come to the Château de Glace. Chapter 8. Resolution in the Thawing Dawn. The sun climbed higher over the Alps, turning the snowfields to blinding gold and setting 1,000 icicles ablaze along the eaves of the Château de Glace. For the first time in 4 days, the great house felt almost warm. Water dripped steadily from the chandeliers in the ballroom, striking the ice floor with soft, rhythmic plinks that sounded like the final notes of a long-silenced waltz. Lady Eleanor de Glace had been taken to the library under guard, her wrists bound with a silk scarf. Poirot had insisted on something less harsh than rope. She sat by the window, staring out at the thawing world, her face empty of the brilliance that had once defined her. The Comte Philippe stood apart, rigid with shock and betrayal, unable to look at the woman he had loved for a decade. Hercule Poirot entered the ballroom one last time, alone. The police sleighs had arrived an hour earlier. Swiss officers now tramped through the corridors, photographing, measuring, taking statements. The machinery of justice had begun its slow, methodical grind. Poirot walked to the center of the ice floor, where Irina Volkova's body had lain. A faint outline remained, a darker patch where her scarlet gown had melted the surface. He stood there for a long moment, hands clasped behind his back, moustache impeccable, despite the sleepless nights. "Yes," he murmured to the empty room, "it is finished, order is restored, and yet—" He thought of the tangled passions that had led to such waste. Love twisted into possession, jealousy sharpened to murder, desperation disguised as elegance. The ballroom, so recently a stage for beauty and terror, now seemed merely sad. a frozen theatre where the dancers had played their final, fatal steps. Footsteps approached. Nikolai Volkov appeared in the doorway, coat over his arm, a small valise in his hand. He looked suddenly very young, stripped of the arrogant grace that had carried him across stages from Moscow to Paris. "Monsieur Poirot," he said quietly, "the police say I may leave tomorrow. The roads are clearing. I wish to thank you." Poirot turned, regarding him with kindly eyes. "There is little to thank, monsieur. Justice has been done, but it brings no one back." Nikolai's gaze drifted to the darker patch on the ice. "She made me," he said, voice rough, "and she destroyed me. I thought Eleanor offered escape, but now—" He shrugged, a dancer's eloquent, helpless gesture. "There is no escape, only the next stage." "You will dance again," Poirot said. "The body forgets grief faster than the heart, but choose your partners more wisely in future." Nikolai gave a faint, bitter smile and left without another word. Dr. Reinhardt appeared next, spectacles gleaming in the sunlight. He carried his medical bag and the notebook Poirot had examined days earlier. "I am returning to Geneva," he said precisely. "The police have cleared me. My experiments, though unorthodox, broke no law." He hesitated. "You suspected me strongly at one point." Poirot inclined his head. "One must suspect everyone, doctor, until the pattern reveals itself. You supplied the cyanide to Lady Eleanor, perhaps unknowingly, perhaps as payment for her silence. That made you complicit, if not criminal." Reinhardt's thin lips tightened. "I supplied a compound for research. I did not ask her purpose. A scientist cannot police every use of knowledge." "Yet knowledge, like poison, kills when misused," Poirot replied softly. The doctor bowed stiffly and departed. Mr. Hargreaves and Miss Clarissa Vale left together in the first sleigh down the mountain. Hargreaves, sobered by events, had offered Clarissa his protection, and it seemed something more. She accepted with the cool pragmatism of an heiress who had learned that survival often required unlikely alliances. Their motives might never be pure, Poirot reflected, but perhaps they would be kinder to each other than Irina had ever been to anyone. Finally, only the Comte remained. He approached Poirot in the entrance hall, older by 20 years than when they had arrived. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, voice steady but hollow, "my house, my name, everything is ruined." Poirot placed a gentle hand on his arm. "No, monsieur. Houses can be cleaned, names can endure. You have lost a wife who was never truly yours, but you have kept your honor. That is no small thing." The Comte managed a wintry smile. "You will stay for luncheon?" "Alas, no. The train to Brussels leaves this afternoon. I have appointments." As Poirot's sleigh bells jingled down the winding road an hour later, he looked back once at the Château de Glace. The sunlight had turned its pale stone almost translucent, and water streamed from every gutter and eave. The great ice ballroom would soon be gone, melted away with the winter. Poirot leaned back against the cushions, drawing his travelling rug about him. "How fragile it all is," he mused aloud. "Beauty built on ice, love that turns to poison, elegance that conceals desperation. One imagines the waltz will go on forever, spinning endlessly under crystal lights, but every dance must end, every partner must bow, and in the end the floor melts, the music stops, and we are left only with the truth." He closed his eyes, already arranging the case in his mind for the neat mental file he kept of such matters. The icy ballroom waltz was over. Death had taken its final turn, and Hercule Poirot, satisfied that order had triumphed over chaos, allowed the rhythmic sway of the sleigh to lull him toward the next mystery, waiting somewhere beyond the snow.